The subject we're going to cover tonight is without a doubt horrifying. It's disturbing. And I don't mind admitting to you and in front of the rest of the world that it's a subject that terrifies me. As a person who doesn't like to stay on the beaten path, I'm not a marked trail kind of guy. I want to get out into the deepest, wildest parts of the wilderness to experience the dynamics and the beauty of nature at 100% rate. I can tell you that this subject gives me great pause. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the subject of feral people. Specifically, do feral people still exist in the Appalachian Mountains and foothills? Now, I ask you to keep in mind that I'm not talking about people who have recently or in the recent past detached from society and now they're living a life of semi-isolation as survivalists or as homeless people. Not at all. I'm talking about people whose ancestors, generations and generations ago, for whatever reasons, under whatever circumstances, became isolated or chose isolation in the deep wilderness in pockets up and down the Appalachian Mountains and foothills. The question is, do their descendants still exist in the Appalachian Mountains today? Evidence suggests that they do, in fact, still exist. Eyewitness testimonies. More importantly, to me, it's the word of the mountain people that say, yes, they do exist. And I give heavy weight to the word of the mountain people. It is said that these feral people have their own language, that they have their own system of communication for purposes of locating one another at distance, for purposes of facilitating the hunt, for purposes of alerting the presence of intruders, and even for purposes of setting up attacks and ambushes. It is said that they display the characteristics of generations of inbreeding. And common sense dictates that, being that there is the severe state of their isolation. It is believed that they are very, very violent. And while they would certainly, at all cost, avoid any accidental contact with any element of the outside world, many believe, including myself, that they will perch on the boundary between their world and our world, hiding, watching, being stealthy, waiting. When we intrude into their world and they are given the opportunity to raid an unattended camp for gear, for food, for clothes, for shoes, for whatever they can use, that they'll do it. But the most terrifying aspect of this subject is the fact that there is plenty of evidence and testimony that tells us that they will opportunistically resort to cannibalism, which means as true hunter-gatherers, they will not only engage in hunting wildlife, but they'll engage in hunting us. An undisputed fact is that thousands of people in the wildernesses of North America have gone missing, vanished, no explanation, never to be seen again. And the Appalachian Mountains, certainly no stranger to that story. Welcome to the strange and unexplained phenomena of the South Mountains of North Carolina. I am your host, Kaiser Rebel. So sit back, grab your favorite beverage, and give me a few minutes of your time, especially if you're a hiker or a camper or a hunter or a fisherman. I think that tonight's subject is worth paying attention to. Now, here in part 1 of episode 18, we're going to first cover an account of an experience by a man whose name is James. And then in part 2, we'll finish talking about his account, and then we'll cover the body of evidence around feral people. And I will share with you an experience that I had when I was with a group of people and something we ran across in the wilderness of Western North Carolina. Now, our witness, James, in the mid-1970s was a young college student. And James was born and raised just past the extreme western end of the South Mountains of North Carolina. So it can be said that he was a child of two worlds, that he was a child of the foothills and he was a child of the big mountains, as I call them. He would have been at home in the South Mountains. He would have been equally at home in the Linville Gorge or Roan Mountain or Wilson's Creek, to name a few places. Definitely a person, in the way he was raised, hunting and fishing, definitely a person at home in the woods. But it was during his time at the university when he developed a passion, a lifelong passion for something that he had never experienced before. He was invited and took the opportunity to go on a long range hiking and camping trip along the Appalachian Trail with some of his college friends. And that was a passion that never left him the rest of his life. And to this day, if he could still do it, he would do it. In the summer of 1977, James became completely disillusioned with the university scene and just tired of college life. And he elected not to go back that fall to start his senior year at the university. So he moved back home. He got a job in a furniture plant and he moved on with his life. Later in that year, near the end of the year, James began to plan a trip, a vacation. And this trip would take place in the springtime. He secured time off from work. Springtime came in the second week of April, 1978. James stepped off on this great adventure. Now, his intent was to hike deep into this wilderness area he had never explored before, set up a base camp, and then each day he was there for a week, he would hike in a different direction to explore, to experience nature, to see what he could see. He budgeted time that day so that he would arrive at his desired destination with a couple hours to spare. He needed a couple hours of daylight to get camp set up, to get him some food, to have a minute to stop and rest. And that's what he did. And he sat there, enjoying a cup of coffee, enjoying a smoke, got in bed early. The next morning, woke up before the sun was up. He took time to make him some breakfast, have some coffee, and then to secure his camp, to pull his food and anything that smelled like food. So what you do is you put them in bags, you tie a rope around it, you throw the rope over a high branch in a tree, you pull those bags up off the ground a fair distance as a countermeasure against bears. If you don't, you're going to have the snout of a bear in your tent, or you'll come back and find your camp decimated. That's what bears do. And as it turned out, apparently there's other things that do that as well. But he did all of that morning. He donned his backpack, he rucked up, booted up, and left out on his journey. Just about 5 minutes into his hike, James heard a noise that was completely foreign to him, something he had never heard in the woods before. Now keep in mind, when you're familiar with a certain wilderness area, a certain part of the country, you know what sounds to expect. You know what sounds the wildlife makes. You know the sounds of trees creaking against one another, and so on and so forth. But James knew that was not a natural sound in the wilderness. James said that he somehow instinctively felt that this clicking noise was a noise being made by a human using their mouth. He thought about it a minute. It bothered him some, but he filed it away and continued on. Just about 5 more minutes down the trail, he realized that he had a hitchhiker in his boot. He had put on his boot, got a pebble or a piece of debris in his boot, and gravity took over, worked its way down, and he was stepping on it every other step. He had to deal with it. He stopped, sat down against a tree, took his boot off, and sure enough, there was that pebble. He put his boot back on and got ready to take that next step, and he heard a distinctive sound. This time he knew exactly what it was. It was the sound of human voices, and these human voices were coming from the direction of his camp, but they weren't speaking English. They just didn't sound right. Join me for tomorrow night for part 2. I will see you then.